Prime Minister Mark Carney revealed his cabinet to the country this week, and he also revealed the expectations he has for his 28 cabinet ministers and 10 secretaries of state, saying he wanted them to move quickly on key issues and with purpose and intention.
Our government will deliver its mandate for change with urgency and determination. It will operate with a commitment to true cabinet government, with everyone expected and empowered to show leadership, to bring new ideas, to have a clear focus, and to take decisive actions to accomplish their work.
Well, that message was very clear on Tuesday afternoon, but by Wednesday morning, it all started to get a little muddy.
I think we're going to see our government run like a corporation, which I think is long overdue.
I think before we start talking about building an entire new pipeline, maybe we should maximize the use of existing infrastructure.
The federal government is focused on affordable housing and delivering that. No, I think that we need to deliver more supply.
What was clear, though, after that first cabinet meeting was that a tax cut is the urgent first priority. But a budget, well, that will have to wait. Until when? We don't really know. So let's start there with our party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And back with us is Melanie Richer. She is a former communications director for the NDP. Okay, Greg, cabinet this week. Went from swearing in to maybe just swearing very quickly in 24 hours, right? What do you make of the picks, and what did you make of the out-of-the-gate performance?
So the picks, mostly pretty good. I have the benefit of a couple of days, to look at this. There are a couple of head scratchers. I think from a policy point of view...
Would you like to give us the head scratchers?
Maybe. We'll see how long. Yeah, we'll see. I think on the policy end, the Prime Minister has covered off, some key cabinet elements really strongly. And, there's been a lot of chatter about, new versus old. But... the reality is the election was about Trump's tariffs, this threat to our economy. And it's a very specific experience to deal with President Trump. And I think that's pretty much the thing that overrides everything else. There are some more the political choices, the rewards that, I want them to, obviously I want Canada to succeed, first of all, but I want the Prime Minister to succeed. But I think we need to keep in mind that in the first term of Trudeau, from 2015 to 2019, there were a lot of MPs that were brand new. And they didn't know that they could push back on the kids in short pants. Famous story about the parliamentary secretary who, chirped back at the Conservatives, got a big round of applause, getting high-fived in the foyer, and then the kid with a binder comes up and says, you can't say that because it's not in the QP book. New paper comes in for the QP book the next day, and their line is used. That is the epitome of a PMO-run, cabinet. And Prime Minister Carney was just quoted as saying he wants government by cabinet. Well, that starts with letting them pick their own chiefs of staff.
Right.
And I think a lot of the things that I looked at this week that were not as successful as they might have been are because they are not staffed up. And there are a lot of questions about why they're not staffed up at this point.
Well, look, the Mark Carney experience, Mel, since he came in as a leadership candidate and then everything, they've been building the plane in the air. I mean, he doesn't even have the Prime Minister's office staffed up at this point. I'm not sure some of the comments we heard on Wednesday are going to go into the QP book. But, what did you make of how it rolled out? Because it was very much a clear, tightly controlled event on Tuesday, and then Wednesday, a little bit more fluid is the word I'll use.
And I would go even outside of the clips that we saw. I think Minister Joly was at an event Wednesday night, and I think a lot of people who left that event were going, what was she talking about, and what is the government's plan? So I think there's a lot of those questions that people are asking, particularly because narrative is important. We kind of heard Carney come out of the election
stealing
with something.
Fred stuff now.
I am. We've been hanging out too long, and now we're going to say the same
right
thing.
All along.
Yeah, exactly. Communications, message, important. And it did not seem like the same folks who kind of came out of the election seeming like they had a plan and they knew what they were going to do. And it just, what I found funny too about the cabinet announcement, not necessarily the folks that have been named, but the expectations and the leeway to the cabinet. It was like, this is going to be a really small focus cabinet with some ministers of state. It's like one of the biggest cabinets we've seen. The emphasis on gender parity, but when you look at, it's almost like there's 3 tiers of cabinet. And when you look at I think it's the Planning and Priorities Committee, which for all intents and purposes is probably his core group of ministers. There's only 2 women on that. So it just seemed like some really interesting messages going into cabinet next week. And of course, some of those are rumors and we chase rumors, but just, it seemed like a weird exercise this week and probably not the message or the narrative that they wanted coming out.
Yeah, Melanie Joly and Anita Anand are on that, but on that central committee, but other than that, it is male dominated. A lot of them with economic defense, public safety, those sorts of things. Fred, what did you make of this week?
I thought Carney did very well in his messaging on the day he brought in his cabinet. Particularly, I did like his message that this was going to be a government by cabinet. Now, it was the same message that Trudeau gave in 2015. That was a complete lie. I do believe Carney wants it, though. I believe that's something he wants to achieve and what he's going towards, and I think it's a good message. His cabinet didn't hear that message yet or understands that, because all of those clips we showed were them going into the cabinet meeting, giving their opinions, what their issues are, before you get around the table to talk like a team. And this is a team sport. And running the government is hard. And you're going to have different views and different opinions, and you have it out at the cabinet table and also at the caucus room, with the whole party. But going in and Guilbeault just saying these things that just railroad the whole process and the team is not helpful to this.
Well, the pipeline comments in particular, I think, provoked a backlash. And Scott Moe, Fred, I thought he helped Mark Carney out the next day when he said, Guilbeault says that, but, I have faith in the Prime Minister and Tim Hodgson. It was interesting to see that coming from the Premier Saskatchewan.
And that's where I think Carney he's going to have to show leadership and clamp down on these outbursts from these cabinet ministers. They can't go out and saying these things that aren't a part of the plan or what the Prime Minister and the team want to push out. They can't be winging it and putting out their own comments. And it's going to be a test of his leadership. Carney's been a bureaucrat most of his life. He has been someone who I know chaired Brookfield's asset management, but actually running a team like this is something he's never done. And it's going to be interesting to see, can he actually lead this party?
Right. So Greg, on that, is it just a bit of an overreaction for like maybe a clumsy, message fest on the first day? I mean, next week, then we get into Parliament. If it's not cleaned up, by, the 1st of June, you're going to have some real problems. But how worried are you and some other Liberals based on just the way things kind of went within 24 hours of a pretty clean cabinet swearing in?
I think there's a high fatigue that came out of the Trudeau administration, where there was kind of an ignorance around real communications, entrepreneurial communications. People that have that job and are at the director's level are not acting in reality as a press secretary for a senior person who is, doing comms off the side of their desk. It was not that way under Jean Chrétien. It was not that way under Stephen Harper. And they also had people that, moved through that system pretty regularly. So you had fresh ideas, fresh people, fresh points of view. And so there is, what I'm noticing, a real unwillingness from a lot of Liberals to kind of, give the folks a pass on this, because, expectations were, we told Canadians that we are ready to go, we have the plan, we're ready to go. So why, and they're missing, communication within government about when certain people will be in certain roles. Deadlines are already being missed. And so again, I don't want to be the general fighting the last battle, but the reality is with the Trudeau folks, quite often it was a minor hit. But the old cliche is death by 1,000 cuts. And so if you can avoid those cuts, especially cuts that build into a theme. And so when you do something 3 or 4 times, the opposition can really seize on it. It's an easy story for the media to tell. So, time's a waste in here, kids. We know that the House is coming back. And I think, there's rumors that there may be a cabinet retreat next week. You need to have those chiefs for those ministers in place already. There is not a lot of willingness, like I say, there's not a lot of willingness to say, yeah, everything's okay, everything's kosher here, when it's really not, because expectations, like we had a near-death experience as a party. You have to learn from that.
Well, do you think you're feeling a bit of trauma that maybe is overhyping some of this week, or do you think this is really a sign of trouble? Because, like as you said, Marco Medicino is the chief of staff, but that's a transitional thing, so we don't really know who's going to be running the PMO, and all the ministers, they're not staffed up yet, right? So some of them haven't even had media training.
Yeah.
Which is a remarkable thing because the calendar is not helping.
I can confirm, right? We saw that. Fred and I were chatting, offline. I mean, why did you stop to talk to the media on your way in if you really don't know what you're going to say? Now, I know we talk a lot about discipline, and I feel that there was sometimes too much discipline with the last government in terms of the messages sound the same and they didn't really often answer the question. And we talked about how after Freeland declined the Prime Minister's offer, you saw people like Mark Miller and other cabinet ministers answering real questions.
Yeah.
Yes, because they have the experience and the knowledge of their files.
Right.
And media training is not a one and done, folks. You gotta, I wrote a note to myself here. I have a little tick that I keep, people remind me on LinkedIn that I keep repeating. Thank you very much. But it is a skill that you have to really work at to keep sharp.
Sure. Mel, how, as a communications professional, what did you see and what would you recommend in terms of getting it a little bit more on message, perhaps? Like Minister Guilbeault was talking about stuff that's not even in his portfolio, and he's an experienced guy who's had the media training. What about the rest of them?
They all kind of are experienced, right? Let's not forget, Gregor was the mayor of Vancouver for a long time. Minister Robertson was the mayor of Vancouver for a long time. There was no reason to freelance on day one. There was no reason to step on, the announcement on Tuesday, and to both your points, going into caucus or into cabinet before you're having those big discussions. There's no need. You say hi, you wave your hand, and you keep walking. Obviously, that's not what journalists want, but that is what you should be doing, particularly when you've just been given the job. So from a comms perspective, I don't think it was good. I don't think it shows that you know what you're doing because you answered questions that you probably shouldn't have answered. And then the other thing is you're stepping on the message, you're stepping on the narrative, and you're not really pushing anything. You're kind of a little bit all over the map talking about stuff that's not necessarily what you want to be talking about. So yeah, it was not good, and that could get them in trouble.
Okay, what about the lack of a budget? I was surprised we weren't going to get a budget because that certainly was my impression.
Yep.
When you talk to people, not necessarily the explanations that were given on camera, you can understand why they might want a bit more time than 2 weeks from now to have to table a budget because that's what you'd have to be ready for. But to not even give an update on the deficit projections and the economic projections, Fred, that I don't get. You may not have your whole plan ready to go at the dollar amounts and you want to talk to industry and these things, but we have no idea what the financial track of the government is right now, and they're going to ask people to vote on a $5 to $6 billion tax cut without knowing where that fits into the bottom line. Mm-hmm.
And it goes against the entire narrative of Carney that he is the man with a plan. That's why he told Canadians, and it's why he won this last election. They believed he had a plan. And in fact, he used it as an attack point. A plan beats no plan. He has no plan now. He doesn't have a fiscal plan. Now he was elected leader of the party in March. He could have given direction even before the election on what he wants his budget to look like. He had a costed platform. Why is there no budget? I find it absolutely mind-boggling that they're doing this, that not giving anything, any kind of a statement.
But what about if it was because I'm trying to wrap my head around this too, right? When you guys won government in 2006 with Harper, he was sworn in early February. Budget came in May. So if you give a financial update now and a budget in September, you know what I mean? But it doesn't even seem like there's going to be a budget at all. There's going to be an economic state. A Fez, your favorite thing.
Right. So look, the Liberals have always been trying to figure out how to budgets balance themselves. Just don't have a budget balance. Look at that.
Right.
No, it's absurd. And even going to September, I think, is not acceptable. You look at the 2006 when Harper came in, that was a wholly transformed government.
I get it.
And they had a number of months to do it, and they did it. Carney became leader of the party in March. He was prime minister in March. He could have started giving direction, and he just had a fully costed platform. Former, again, central banker, Mr. Finance guy, worked at the Department of Finance, knows the ins and outs of that department. He was one of the guys that helped us do our budget in 2008 when we did it. So it just makes no sense to me. In 2011, we had an election, and a few weeks later, we brought in the budget. Now, it's the same government, same prime minister, but it makes no sense, and it goes against the entire narrative that he set up, that he was the man with the plan.
Greg, what do you think? I mean, are people making too much out of this, or is this really surprising and difficult?
Probably going to tick off a lot of Liberals here, but I don't disagree. I did not necessarily expect a budget. I did expect an economic update of some sort.
Yeah.
And I also think, because it's an opportunity, you have some transformative things that you want to do. You could drive them through the lens of your spring economic statement, however you want to spin it. Also, the lack of communications. You know, like you could have talked about, we want to get our middle class tax cut passed. We want that done, and then we need to know for this reason. There were lots of ways to communicate around this, but there's really been nothing. I mean, I was glad that the minister came and talked to you about it, but I think at that point there was hours and hours of people wondering, why is Mark Carney's government choosing to go in this direction?
It's like they didn't
and
think
I personally
people
don't
would
have a
be
great
surprised.
answer. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
they didn't anticipate it, or maybe they just don't think it's important. I don't know, Greg. What do you view it?
Yeah, no, I thought, it's a huge missed opportunity. I mean, the challenge, and I'm sure we're going to talk about Mr. Poilievre, but everything that Prime Minister Carney has done since he's been elected has kind of reminded people that this was the right choice against Donald Trump. This was the right choice in terms of his messaging around cabinet, and this would have been a great opportunity again to say, look, this is the right person we've picked for this. He's going to tell us where Canada stands right now, and then perhaps we wouldn't see a budget in the fall, but it'd be a more, I think the phrase fulsome was used for a fall economic statement. But I really think, I'm wondering now if we'll see some sort of update within the speech from the throne, or how they will address this.
Yeah.
But it also gave unnecessary meat to the Conservatives this week. You saw Mr. Poilievre rush out. He hasn't been really available to the media, and he rushed out to try to do a very quick press conference on this. They would not have been doing that if they didn't think there was opportunity for them.
Yeah, I'm not sure King Charles is going to give us like GDP forecasts and debt to GDP
I'm
ratios.
shocked that you think that.
But I'm gonna, it just feels like it's not the right venue. But I get the sense Minister Champagne might have to do something. Mel, I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, one thing too is like with the comms things we were just talking about. A budget gives you focus and narrative and direction, right? And that kind of puts guardrails around what ministers can refer to when they are ambushed on their way in.
Absolutely. I don't know if this is the first time that all three of us agree, but I think total missed opportunity. And to Fred's point about, the man with the plan, he said he was going to move quickly. He kept saying how different he was than Justin Trudeau, because Justin Trudeau talked a lot and didn't act, and how he was going to act, he was going to do the things. And we have this massive threat, and we need to do all the things that he talked about in the campaign, and we need to do them quick to invest in Canadians and protect our industries here. And then it's like, oh, well, we're going to wait until the fall. I don't think that signals good to people who, I talk a lot about people lending their vote because it was such an important election. I don't think that signals good thing. I think we were obviously, it felt like the country was at a crossroads when Justin Trudeau was still Prime Minister, and it felt like folks were getting more divided than they were before. I think this Prime Minister has a very short timeline of, if he does not want the country to go back to that, he needs to actually prove what he has been saying. And I think him not going ahead with a budget is kind of just like, you're playing that game it's just not helpful.
Okay, we got to pivot to something else. But I mean, there are two moments without the budget where he can do some of that. And that's the first ministers' meeting in Saskatoon, if something big comes out of that, and the G7, if he gets something done with Donald Trump by the time he gets there in the middle of June. Otherwise, we'll see where it goes in the short period of time. Okay, we have a little bit of breaking news to tell you about that shows some cracks within an already diminished NDP caucus. This was first reported by the Globe and Mail, but CBC News can also confirm that some NDP members of caucus aren't happy about the appointment of Don Davies as interim leader. The CBC's David Thurton joins me now to talk about this. So David, this letter that's been sent, what can you tell us about what's going on here?
Well, David, I can tell you that it is quite a stunning letter. It is very harsh in its criticism about the way the NDP's federal council went about selecting the interim leader, the new interim leader of the NDP. Of course, that interim leader is Don Davies. He was selected after Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, of course, stepped aside after the collapse of the NDP and himself losing his own seat. So Don Davies was appointed on May 5th as interim leader, and then we had this letter. We now have this letter, which was sent 3 days after, and we have just obtained, the Globe has just obtained, and it was written by 3 MPs, David, Leah Gazan, Laurie Edlout, and Jenny Kwan. The letter starts by listing all the things that New Democrats achieved in the last parliament, dental care, pharmacare, that kind of thing, but it states in a bruising way that NDP MPs did not benefit from that in the last election. Because so many did not return to Parliament. It states that the same old practices that led to the loss of all those MPs are the same things that led to the election of Don Davies on May 5th. And the letter states that those things were a process that wasn't transparent, failed to uphold democratic principles. It suggested that there were other MPs beyond Don Davies in that small caucus of 7 NDP MPs who were interested in serving as interim leader, but they weren't allowed to share their vision, and they were ignored. So those 3 MPs that wrote that letter, Leah Gazan, Laurie Idlow, Jenny Kwan, they're now asking for a redo of that process and for the federal council of the NDP to resubmit their choice for interim leader and for the parliamentary caucus to ratify that.
Right. Okay, because it's interesting here in the letter, David, that they do say that each of them spoke to Mary Shortall, who is the president, but they say it's not clear that these conversations were intended to discharge the constitutional obligation to consult with the caucus, which is interesting. And they do say they want a 2/3 majority ratification, which in a caucus of 7 is 4.62, so I guess 5 of the 7. So, the federal council, though, they get to do this, right? I mean, how much say does the caucus actually have here? Explain to me the process for picking an interim leader in the NDP.
Well, it's very clear. You read the NDP Constitution, and it says that the federal council, which is this governing body that represents the membership of the party, gets to decide who the interim leader is. And they consult with the parliamentary caucus, but the decision rests with the federal council in this regard. And in fact, I'm being told that the last interim leader of the NDP, Nicole Turmoil, federal council didn't even pick that leader. It was Jack Layton who said that he wanted her to be leader when he had his cancer diagnosis. But bottom line, federal council, chooses the interim leader with some consultation from the federal caucus.
Okay, David, thank you very much. This is CBC's David Thurton. We're going to pick up on this with Mel, Greg, and Fred. And Mel, I'm going to start with you.
Perfect.
A good bounce back from the election.
Tell me about it.
I don't know how, if they all talk to the president, what do you make of this? This seems very strange to me.
Very strange. I think it's very silly. I think it's a massive waste of time. And this is not what New Democrat members are going to be wanting our folks to be doing. The letter in itself, I just find so disappointing. You talk about all the good things that we got for people. And it's like, we got all these good things, but we lost. So that means the good things weren't good things? Not sure. Later on, it talks about how we don't want to continue to litigate the shortcomings of this recent process, but here's a letter. We're going to give it to journalists everywhere. And this is now going to be the story that we're talking about. Obviously, devastating loss. Obviously, a lot of rebuilding that we have to do. The leader is resigned. Federal council does not get appointed by the leader. Federal council is elected. They're an elected body representing the membership. I just think that this is not what we should be focusing on right now. And also, it's an interim leader for maybe a few months. You're going to get the opportunity to rebuild the party. You're going to have the opportunity to go through a leadership race, and you're going to have the opportunity to decide what didn't work, what do we need to do going forward, and to focus on that. And this, to me, is really disappointing.
I don't want to sound mean,
No.
but this reminds me of the Green Party stuff during the Annamie Paul period, right? Where it's all about internal processes and the guts of short-term decision-making rather than where do we go as a party? Is it the urban progressive direction? Is it more back to the class-based politics? Instead, it's about the process of who talked to who and who picked whom
and despite the process being followed the way it should be followed, right? It's not like, hey, we didn't do what we were supposed to do, we're upset here, it needs to be rectified. It was, oh no, the process worked as intended, and we're just upset that it didn't work out in our favor, which I think, again, like, is disappointing. It does seem messy, and messy for no reason. And we were around this table just a few months ago talking about how when the Liberals were doing this, that this was not what Canadians want to see. Canadians want you to see that the families working together. You can have internal stuff, but it should never go outside. And at a time where you got 7 people, this is just like the wrong way to be focusing your energy. And there are things that we're going to need to be focused on. And the fact of the matter is, one of the biggest arguments that we had during the election was, Mark Carney is not going to be the same Liberal leader that Justin Trudeau was, and we need to hold him to account. There's 7 of you to do that. You need to focus your energy doing that, because there's going to be things that the Prime Minister does that we're going to find harmful to people. So instead of this, you should be finding a way to, work together and do that.
And figuring out how to function without official party status and all that stuff. And full marks to Ian Bailey at the Globe and Mail, who first broke the story. I want to give credit where credit is due. Fred, I'm sure you have some semi-snarky thoughts on this, so why don't you just go ahead?
Well, it's funny, you pointed out the Greens. This also reminds me of youth politics in fighting on youth wings for presidencies, and weak EDAs where you never elect members, but you have these internal fights, electoral district association boards, where you have these weird process fights that achieve nothing but just whine. And it's loser talk. It's not helpful to the party. You have a national convention every 2 years. If you want a constitutional change to change how you pick your interim leader, bring it up then. Don't start attacking the current leader weeks before the House comes back at a time when your party does need to focus on rebuilding and finding who it is. Internal nonsense about how you chose the interim leader is not where you start to rebuild the political party.
There's 7 MPs. It's going to be hard enough to get coverage. It's going to be hard enough to get your message out. It's going to be hard enough for folks.
Well, they're finally getting coverage. We're finally talking about
it. It's like, let me raise my hand, and this is how we're going to be talking about the NDP. Is just
at a time they have tremendous opportunity too, right? They hold the balance of power still. They are the ones who can make or break this government if they choose to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Bloc is there too, right? So, but Mr. Blanchet has said we'll give you a year, right, to deal with all this. Now, look, in fairness, they do say, Greg, that they are open to the selection of any of our colleagues as interim leader, including MP Davies. But right now, you've got the caucus split in half.
That's a bit odd. And thanks in the hallway to Fred for helping me with the math, trying to figure out 2/3 of 7.
There's a reason. Are always here to help Liberals.
Well, I mean, there's a reason why they call me the pretty one. So thanks for the help with the math. I just find there's 2 problems with this. One is the stuff that's in the letter, and there's a lot of odd stuff there, and the fact that this is the process. If I'm a member of the NDP and you're in a massive rebuild situation right now, you're not going to like that. They say they're not unhappy with Don Davies, but let's do the math here. There's 3 people that signed this. Don Davies would be a vote. That leaves 3 other people. This is sort of a split decision. And the questions they're asking, is it appropriate to appoint a whip in a caucus of only 7? I don't know. I think you got to show up for the votes, but I don't know why this is in a letter that's ended up in the hands of the Globe and Mail. And finally, to quote one of my favorite characters on Parks and Rec, is talk show host Joan Calamezzo, and she says, "This is the moment where we speculate wildly." I look at these 3 names and I think, I wonder if they want to cross the floor.
Do you want them?
Do you think they fit? In which direction? Do you think they fit in a Mark Carney Liberal Party?
Well, I looked at a news article for Laurie Idlut in Nunavut, and she gave an interview where she wasn't super complimentary about the Liberals, but she said she had an open mind.
Okay. All right, look, Fred and Greg, you've had a chance to pick on Greg and Mel. We're going to talk about the Conservatives now. Pierre Poilievre is adjusting to life without a seat in the House of Commons while still living in the House reserved for the Leader of the Opposition.
14 Trudeau ministers are now in Carney's cabinet. It's more of the same when Canada needs real change. Even the new additions are problematic. If this is the new blood that Mr. Carney is bringing into the cabinet, then sadly for Canadians, nothing is going to change.
So Poilievre could hold that scrum in the foyer of the House because one of his MPs was there with him, because as a defeated member of Parliament, he no longer has that right until he reclaims a seat. So you may see more events like this with Poilievre as Conservative leader, not opposition leader, holding media availabilities outside of the buildings to make his views heard.
Mr. Carney said during the election campaign that he had a plan. And he took great delight in saying that a slogan is not a plan. Well, a budget is a plan. And if he does indeed have a plan, if he does know what he's doing, then he would introduce a budget so that Canadians know exactly what the finances are.
Okay, so how is the Conservative leader adapting to his new political reality? Fred, let's start with you. What do you make of it? It was a different kind of week for Pierre Poilievre, right? You know, it's this weird in-between moment he's in. What do you make of what the Conservatives are doing right now?
Leader of the opposition is one of the most difficult jobs in politics, particularly after losing an election. So this is a tough time. You know, he came out. I thought his press conference after the swearing in was a bit long, a bit hit on a lot of notes. One of them, though, was that basically, let's see what this government does and we'll hold them to account, which I think is the most important thing the Conservatives talk about right now in a public way. I do think it's important he came out to talk about the budget. It's a big issue when we find out we're not going to have a budget after someone ran to be Prime Minister saying they have this plan that they want to implement. So I thought it was good that he did that. But at the end of the day, I think Poilievre should be going to the ground and figuring out why we lost and figuring out what is the way forward for the party. I don't think he needs to be that vocal over the next number of months. He needs to be, I believe, having a real post-mortem and figuring out why we lost and how do we fix that and what corrections do we make, if any, to ensure we win the next election. Andrew Scheer's the parliamentary leader that's going to lead the team into the House. He's very experienced at doing that. We're only sitting for 2 weeks, apparently no budget, so...
I think it'd be more than 2 weeks, but yeah, it won't be much longer than 2 weeks.
2 to 4 is the schedule. Though Conservatives have offered to sit all summer if we do want to have a budget at some point.
They do that every summer. It never happens. They're going to sit through Christmas when they brought in a filibuster after closure, too.
When Doug Ford was elected in 2018, they sat all summer in Ontario. So Conservatives are okay with working all summer if they have to. But no, I think it's a tough job right now. He's in this weird spot, particularly when you have the stink of a loss on you, right? It's there. There's no question. You can see it on his face.
Well, a personal loss too, right? Like,
For sure,
he is the Conservative leader, but he's not the leader of the opposition, because Andrew Scheer is, right? Because you need to be a member of Parliament.
That's why, spend the summer, figure this out. In the fall, he will be back as leader of the opposition and ready to go.
Mel, what do you think?
Yeah, and I mean, this is probably hard for him, I would imagine. Like, you spent so much time driving the bus or spent so much time, driving the message for the last 2 years, and then this change happened, the election happened, and not only did your message not connect with people, but you're now not in the House to drive it. So what do you have to do? Well, you've got to be friendlier with journalists, and you actually have to do press conference, and you actually have to take questions, because that's the only way that you can get the clips out that you want to get out, because he's not going to be in the House to be able to ask questions to the Prime Minister or to debate or whatnot. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't disagree with you, the going to ground and figuring out what didn't work for the next one. There is time to do it. Obviously, people are paying attention because of what's happening with Trump. But I think no matter what, people are going to give the Prime Minister a few months to kind of try to figure that out. So I don't think he needs to be super on his case right now. But yeah, interesting to see him do a few press conferences this week.
Do you think he should write a 2-page letter asking how the party
I would
picked Andrew Scheer as the
love
interim leader?
for him to write a 2-page letter. If he wants to, do all of that stuff, I would love to see it.
Greg, what are your thoughts on the week that Pierre Poilievre has had?
I noticed in the first press conference just how low energy he was, and reading, and very much at the start of that. And the day that, as that was going on, it was Cabinet Day, and in our day jobs, it's a pretty busy day informing clients what's going on. And so I was a little late getting to stream the press conference, but I had seen a couple of posts on social media about how the opposition leader had a measured tone, et cetera, et cetera. And then by the time I, got the feed, he was going line by line and through people's CVs, just kicking the crap out of them. And again, my first instinct on that is you've not heard the message that Canadians were sending you, and he sounded like same old guy. And then It's funny that he mentions slogans in his second press conference, because he reverted back to the slogans, safe streets, etc. And it felt like 2024. It felt like he didn't lose the election. And I totally agree with Fred. Go to ground, find out what really happened, because they keep telling us how well they did. But there's going to be a context around that at some point, because they had massive record fundraising. How much money did you spend to get that result? You also were, for a long time going up against Justin Trudeau, who's incredibly unpopular. You have a huge segment of the media in Canada that are pro-conservative. And then we had all these independent media folks that we saw, going back to, when Justin Trudeau was on a beach in Tofino, there's a whole bunch of that group that were carrying your water for you. So when you look at all that investment, and this is the result you have, and he sounds like he hasn't learned anything, he needs to go to ground. That one thing though, Rob Russo on another panel talked about the by-election, and he kind of posed the question of what if the separatist group in Alberta actually wants to run a candidate against him in that part of Alberta. That could be very interesting.
Yeah, it would. Fred, you got a last thought?
Oh, just on Greg's point about the communications and pointing out the CV, I agree. I don't think he should be doing that stuff. I don't think he should be. I would be giving these guys as much rope as possible to hang themselves. Let's see what they can do. They've just been elected. They're coming in 6 months' time or whenever, when we're back in the fall, when he's back as leader of the opposition. Let's see, have they accomplished anything? Have they changed? And then go on it. You promised this, you failed. Go after them then. Going after them now is just no point.
I'm very curious to see how the media relationship will evolve, right? Because there were press conferences where it was downright abusive at times, the individual reporters, right? And people kind of took it, and I'm curious to see if they'll take it now after this outcome.